Good afternoon. This is Richard Ackley. It's November 20th, a little after 1 o'clock. What I'd like to do today, with the help of Tim Webster and Oneida Elder, who has taken a lot of time with me over the years on doing videos. In my family, I have 5 members that have dealt with I call it the Academy, but I'd like to share today a book that Rosemary Ackley Christensen and Lisa M. Poupart did, called Connective Pedagogy, Elder Epistemology, Oral Tradition, and Community. This book was published in 2013, and Rosemary passed away 2 years ago. Today it's 2025, so she passed away 2023, which would be, this book was, the title of it in the University of Manitoba, and for students or others, the University of Manitoba has these books in their Native Studies programs, and you can download them as a PDF or whatever you call it. The back side here says, Indigenous teaching methodology based upon 7 principles reflecting traditional knowledge within the holistic worldview. Balanced with the persuasive Western worldview of the Academy, it is explored, deliberated, echoed, and if you have time, anyone would like to read this. It has implications for any tribe or anyone across the country. If we were in Canada, the Mosaic or other tribes, you're trying to determine or help tribes figure out what is important. And then the tribe that I'm from, Ojibwe, they talk about wisdom, mutual love, respect, bravery, honesty, humility, and truth. But those are generalized principles. But what I find interesting is epistemology is a theory of knowledge with regards to its methods, validity, and scope. Rosemary, in many ways, was like a sister, like an aunt, but she was one of the forerunners where elders are important. And the language of elders is you spend time in learning from what elders have to say. And if you do that, you then gain some knowledge or some experience. And the way she fitted this in to the Academy was she provided a context where in the students of Indigenous classes, she provided a context for learning. And in that context, she made use of certain principles. And she stated to me, elders have to always be understood and respected. And her format was, at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, it could be Manitoba, it could be any university, a student would take 12 credits or whatever credits it is, and a student would spend time just with that elder. I had a student worked with me one semester when I was doing this as an elder, and that was one approach. The other approach she has used is a dialogue approach where she had students learn in groups, learn in the way the Academy, it wasn't no midterm, no final, but she wanted them to learn in a way from one another. And if they wanted to meet on a weekend, whatever they want to do, then in that repetition and the narrative style would be a model for people to communicate. Now, how did we learn? We learn by storytelling, we learn by a circular way. It's different, not to say linear systems are not important, engineering, all these things, but in that process, she had something called participation learning. Now, if you look up on AI, our University of Wisconsin Green Bay, one of the things with elders is they try not to make use of printed material. They try to make use of oral tradition. Now, when in the spirituality deal, I thought it was kind of humorously interesting, and I'm not so much into this, but I have my whole stack of Vine Deloria books. I thought that was kind of interesting. He says, and I'm Ojibwe or Chippewa, he says, more complicated is the Chippewa creation story, which says that God tried 4 times to create the present world, but the first 3 efforts were doomed to failure because there was too much ice. The 4th time, the effort was successful. If this tradition is a memory of the 4 stages of North American glaciation, it implies that the glaciation occurred within a reasonable short period of time so that people remembered the process. Since the Chippewa flood story relates that the flooding was caused by rapidly melting ice, we might suggest that the Chippewa tradition are something to be taken seriously. Who knows? But it was interesting. And then throughout my life, I've tried to always see things with a native. Today, to upgrade is called the indigenous eye. Now, there's very few documents in understanding Native American theology. I was talking to a friend who said he's been 50 years being an Episcopal priest, so he knows theology. So I try to carry on a conversation about indigenous spirituality, and it just didn't exactly move as much as I wanted it to move. So to get back to the learning model that she articulated and she made use of, it's the group process. She says, elder teaching depends upon experience. Students, therefore, are heavily involved in the process of both reading and learning. Teacher is a coach, an expert elder. Teachers learn through this method, experiencing reciprocity through the teaching learning style. As they listen to students present their materials, they ponder and gain insights from these presentations. Students learn from each other as well as the teacher, and through required participation, through experiences presented material and interacting with others. But then as a favorite one is, she says, everyone has personal sovereignty, and it took me a while. I mean, as a legal person, it means boundaries or respect, and when you deal with an elder, and I'd call it a social covenant or a contract, you're trying to respect the narrative, the oral history. Even for me, as much as I like to say I'm an oral person, notice I still have the pen, I still have the outline. So there's a composite of that. But in my brain cells, at age 80, I can draw upon, I'm not advertising any cable TV here, but I looked up something yesterday, and AI and I were in agreement. So in some ways, if you're older, you probably have many channels you can turn on life experiences. So it says personal sovereignty is a core value among many tribes with the holistic worldview. Students are provided with choices. In other words, teachers, you want to respect their learning process. And I believe the oral tradition, elders can do that. And then they don't now, in a linear way, A, B, C, number of things. But for this model, the circular model works because there's a circle of learning in part of that process. One of the things I've enjoyed of working with the collaborator I work with, Tim Webster, who is an elder, but I want to share something. I was at a service and this woman came up, she said, "Do you remember Timmy?" I said, "Well, he's an elder." I said, "I forgot, he was a young person." But the context is, when I came out of the womb, I was not the driving force. I was dependent. And now we have this interdependency. A little sidebar, I recently lost some weight, but if I didn't have the medical doctor, the cardiologist, the coach, if I didn't go to the fitness center for 200 times and eat properly, and what people should do, there's some improvement. And I'm moving much better. But to get back to the context, what she says, respect. What I'd like to further clarify or present Rosemary's construct, and she came about this through her research, and she was a strong-willed person, grew up in the tribal communities, just a strong-willed person, and I love her dearly. Just what a person to part of my family. I was blessed and honored to know her. She's worked with many people. Very much of an educator. So I honor that. But the key is she has these terminologies called respect, learning how to listen to each other, learning everyone's name, learning how to individual seek skills, allowing person groups to use their skills within groups according to their experience. And groups, sometimes individuals, it's not like they're forced into it. You can do it randomly, you can bring people in. It's not like with me, my last name is Ackley. I always have to get the first to get my shots. It was not something I wanted to do, but that's the linear model. Reciprocity is the individual skills that are reviewed within a group process to promote goals. In other words, reciprocity creates a relationship on respect, and it builds up hopefully a responsible narrative and dialogue. And then also, in that context, is relationship. You want to make sure the students and even elders, I mentioned the elder and the one student I worked with for a semester, but if you're in a group, you want to make sure the relationships are healthy, in a circle, not competitive, just helping out. In that model, though, there's some personal responsibility, how you define the class, how you define the experience. And the reason I think it has merits for both tribal and non-tribal people is tribal folks need to find out their own history. Non-tribal people need to find out their own history too. American, you're American, or whatever culture it is. So the model can be used in many ways, and responsibility allows for that action, that format to take place. But what is really important, at least I believe, is that the oral learning is something that really helps, and Rosemary really promoted that, and she calls those are the cultural aspects that I mentioned of my own tribe, but her 7 principles had to do, in any tribe, any group has certain cultural values, religious or non-religious. She says the 7 principle worldview is principle of peaceful coexistence. Every life form has a right to exist as created. We're a small part in a vast living space. So we in the native world treat everyone in creation, and how we interact. Then she has this one called principle of equality. Each life form is equal to the other. And then this other one here, principle of connectedness. All of life is nourished and sustained, supported and energized by each other. All living things are connected to the web of life. The principles of balance, the natural essentials of fire, water, earth, and air are the main elements. But then what she also shares is the principle of the circle. Whatever good is done is returned to the giver. Unfortunately, this rule also applies to negative energy. People who harm other things bring harm to their own spirit. We need to protect our spirit from negative energy. Where I was 11 months ago with my own physical exercise program, it's much different. I have so much energy, I'm moving. So there's a transformation, and you're hoping the students in a circle. And then the other one is the principle of subsistence. Take only what is needed to survive. Taking more violates this law and creates an imbalance that requires adjustment. One has surplus shared with other living things. I think I've shared in the past, one of my good friends wrote a book called Affluenza, where people take too much. I come from a hunting, fishing, gathering society, so I don't take too much. And then the other one is, in this model, the last, which is probably the most important, is the principle of gratitude. Give thanks. If the ability, capacity, and willingness to give thanks is forgotten, not practiced, human beings own nothing. In other words, it says here, student and teachers work together, and there isn't this hierarchical model, and that makes a lot of sense to me culturally. But the key here is, unless you understand the relationship to the elder, and unless you understand these principles, but what I found interesting in the research that Rosemary did all those years in her education, she has shared that one of the areas that she has shared with this, and I'm looking for it, but I can say it without looking for it. She mentioned that we're from cultures where we don't interfere with anyone. We can provide opinions, we can share, but it's not up for me to tell somebody what to do. Even talking to an elder would say certain areas are interesting, but if you spend some time in the circular model, then it means you're better equipped to deal with many models of learning. Circular, or linear, or existential, but most tribal people, most non-tribal people forget that they just didn't arrive here. You cannot deny the generations, at least I believe you cannot deny that, because if you deny it, then you have denied your own sense of existence. And in that context, it doesn't help to participate in a model, as I recap: personal sovereignty, respect, responsibility, and some other people have added some new ones called renew. You constantly renew, or even being resilient. There could be future generations where they'll add certain dynamics to the circular model of teaching. But I felt Rosemary did something, she calls it the 3 R's for dialogue: respect, responsibility, and reciprocity. And I just added another friend of mine who did a doctoral program under this model, include the word resilience and renew. And I would say I may not be doing this in an oral manner, in fairness, because in the limited amount of time I have, this is if a student or if an academic or friend or somebody, an elder, wants to look at further information, as I previously met, my opening, University of Manitoba has all the books on for, they're public. In other words, it's public knowledge, and it's tribal knowledge. Now there's a caveat to this. Sometimes certain tribes do not want to share the knowledge, which is their right, because they don't want it to be misappropriated, but they can share the model of learning.